So, Zootropolis 2 is finally here in the UK. I just found out that people in the US got it like 2 days ago, and I'm a little jealous. Even still, I went to see it at the earliest possible time in the morning, and I'm putting together this video as fast as I can. All to wrap up my own little thoughts about what is yet another Disney sequel. But I'll be honest, I was really pleasantly surprised with this one. So we've covered Zootropolis 2 a couple of times on the channel in the past. There were 2 mainline trailers that I reacted to, and the general impression I got was that I didn't really have that much to say. It seemed like the most standard, boggled down Disney sequel movie of a movie. You know, it was like, it seemed to do some nice things. The world of Zootropolis naturally has a lot of room to explore in good, multi-layered ways. And the sequel just seemed like more, and that's decent, you know? I wouldn't quite go as far as to say that Zootropolis 1 is one of Disney's absolute best animated movies, but it is pretty damn amazing overall. There are a lot of Animal Kingdom movies. Most of them are worse than Zootropolis 1. I mean, I've outright done a scene breakdown talking about some of the deeper meanings and symbolisms behind a single scene of Zootropolis that I have all sorts of praises for, and I'm a big fan of the TV series, the spin-off that they have on Disney+. We've covered all sorts of angles on this series, and the sequel as a first impression in the marketing, I didn't expect that much, to be honest. I was expecting to go to this cinema screening and be like, yeah, it's a pretty good sequel, and call it there. I am very pleasantly surprised to say that actually, I feel wildly different about it. This is coming at a time when Disney is doing their sloppiest work ever. They have sequels for everything under the sun, and both those sequels and their recent originals and their recent remakes are all god-awful. Some of the worst, most terrible excuses of cinema I've seen by the company whose entire job is to create cinema. But with this, I gotta say, and maybe it's just because it's still currently very novel to me, but I could watch this again way more easily than I could watch the first movie again. I really genuinely enjoyed this movie, and the fact that it didn't have to do the full introduction of everything and just got stuck in only made it all the better, because everything it did get stuck into was just really well done. And though I think there is plenty of argument to be made that Zootropolis of all movies doesn't need a sequel from Disney, at the same time, this movie absolutely finds its place pretty well and rolls together quite nicely. The 2 main protagonists are now police officers, so they go and do another case. Whilst at the same time, this new case allowed for all sorts of more expansions of an already fascinating world building. I still think that Zootropolis in general is one of Disney's most interesting worlds, not just because it's all animals, but the way they managed to adapt a lot of things in the logic of the world building is some of Disney's greatest achievements in recent years, and they just keep going with it further. This time, it's all about a whole other species that we haven't even really addressed before, somehow, in the form of reptiles and snakes, where we come to learn exactly where their place is in society, a little bit more specific of an entire tree line of animals, which is a nice natural expansion from the simple predator and prey dynamic. I also really enjoy that the next sort of conflict on a societal size that they play around with is simply territorial animals, and though they blend it down to a single species, I do think that's a really good natural direction to take a conflict in this universe. It just, I think, makes perfect logical sense, whilst at the same time, when it comes to the actual action and the storyline, it feels like Disney's taken a lot of reference from DreamWorks' The Bad Guys, because this feels a lot like The Bad Guys in all of the best ways. The action sequences are easily the highlight of this movie, and there are several of them throughout. Each of them would, they're just incredible choreography work, and very much feels a lot like those heist sequences that you saw in the likes of The Bad Guys, that I guess just fits really well in an Animal Kingdom, somehow. Add on the fact that the world itself is just so fascinating and can play with a lot of features, and you just get an incredibly breathtaking and refreshing action sequence and storyline. It all just comes together nicely. Now, I say storyline, this is, relatively simple, but in all of the best ways. It is a mystery, which it was the last time, uncovering a mystery of a clue. You learn more of the world building as it unravels. You're chasing after a guy, you find the guy, you know, things happen. It's fairly standard, but it's all the good sides of standard. I wouldn't necessarily call this an outright tropey cliche narrative. It keeps you on your toes enough and does a brilliant splay of unique adaptations and originality along the way. And generally, I think they do a great job in expanding a lot of what we already saw from the first movie, as well as the TV show as well, actually. In fact, there is a lot of bringing back the recurring elements of the past. And it's interesting because in a lot of ways, I see that as a lot of just like self-referential, crammed in quota stuff. But at the same time, I think with this particular world and this particular set of characters, it surprisingly works really well when they did it. A lot of these are the highlights of the first movie, so of course they try to bring it back in the sequel, but I also just think, I don't hate it. The most crammed one possibly is the Weasel reappearing to do more knockoff movies, a whole lot less so you see less references, and it brings back Alan Tudyk. But it's also a very, very short scene, and it comes with one of the best lines in the movie, where they outright say, it's all sequels, and they say the industry's going down the drain. That kind of self-awareness, I really appreciate. Not gonna give any props to the actual company and the CEOs though. That died the moment they genuinely decided to do generative AI in Disney+. But otherwise, that's a really solid joke that I really enjoyed. And when it comes to all the other returning cast members from the first movie, they each come with varying degrees of success, but generally pretty good. I don't know if we necessarily needed the cheetah police officer for 2 scenes. One where he's dancing with lights, very fitting, and another where he's trying to hack into a computer for a password. You know, it's fine. But then the fact that they also managed to bring back the sloth, because of course they do, but they do it in a matter of going back to his speeding car sequence to help the characters speed away in a car to get somewhere fast, also just makes too much sense. And they do technically repeat the sloth receptionist very briefly in a flashback, but I think it's fine. It's really genuinely fine, and I guess really a surprising display of how you can successfully hit your writing quotas and wrap it in with a neat little bow that fits those puzzle pieces in pretty perfectly. Every recurring character had some sort of thing to contribute to the main plotline that fit both in for that character's perspective as well as naturally brought the story forwards. That really is the way you're supposed to do those returning features. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, you have all sorts of new characters to add to the ensemble, and they magically manage to make it not too crowded. There's like 6 police officers anew that you need to catch up with, maybe 8, but the fact that they appear in pairs and they each have their own kind of catchphrase approach to things, I think works really nicely, and were of course brilliantly designed because most of their features then end up being very specific to where they end up going. There are 2 goat ram police officers, and they show up on a mountain. Brilliant. Same as well, I was supposed to mention this earlier, so I might just edit it into here. I love the use of the porcupine rolling out to be the road spikes for a police car blockade. That's brilliant. Love that stuff. I could consume that all day. And then of course, at the very center of it, you have this snake character. Meant to be the representative of all reptile kind in the city that I'm surprised I didn't notice didn't exist before. And I think the expansions they made with them were also very nice and logical and really nice to the whole plot. I just like the way they expanded. There is a whole district of lizards and there's a hidden underwater bar, and they do a lot of really nice jokes with the lizards that are more than just the simple do the one lizard thing they're known for. They kind of play all of them. Whether it is eating a fly with your tongue, but then that turns into an instrument, or whether it turns into playing another instrument and the lizard ears come out, or simply just they don't need to sit on seats, they sit on branches. How have I not seen that before? I don't know. It seems obvious, but I love the way Disney adapts the animals that they are assigned to in this world. Although it did take me an embarrassing amount of time to realize the zebras weren't saying zebras, they were saying zebros. A little bit millennial coded, but hey, they're also millennial, they're a bit older, it's fine. And honestly, I think a lot of that humor worked quite nicely. Going back to the comedy conversation though, as well, I think this was, again, really well written in a lot of ways. There are a lot of times when some of these jokes that they go for, I kind of classically roll my eyes at, but somehow the way this movie plays with it and adapts around it, I think just worked really nicely. It's a little bit millennial coded, that whole self-referential explaining the full self-awareness of therapy and the traits of a character too much is a very millennial thing. But I think the way it fits into this script surprisingly works. One of the loudest laughs I got, because I'm an old man now, is a part where Nick says, "Oh, I've got childhood trauma," to which Chief Bogo turns around and says, "Do you want to have adulthood trauma?" No one else in the cinema laughed at that, but I chuckled. Does that say something about me, or does that say something about everyone else? Either way, the way they managed to mix that in with the script, while I'd usually be like, this is outdated, somehow this time around really worked. And I don't think that comes as an inconsistency from me. I think it just further shows this is how a movie can do that well, and every other example I've seen doesn't. You've also got some of the other classic, simple jokes you'd see kind of in the background. Robert Irwin makes a cameo appearance, and his character's name is Robert Furwin. You know, that's good. I can't really complain about that. And even just simple little gags, like there's a worker inside of a vending machine, just gets a nice little background chuckle out of me. A lot of the jokes just come in how this world is designed, and it just works. It just fits really naturally. I really enjoy it. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, that's not to say that I don't have complaints. I, of course, have some sort of complaint somewhere, but they're much more of a nitpick than anything else. And a lot of it's also concentrated around one certain area. Now, we'll talk about the spoiler stuff more towards the end of this video, much like how it is at the end of the movie. But one of the main ones I noticed a little early on that was strange was I feel like there was a certain point at the movie where the sound design kind of stopped in a way. There's a part where the main characters are inside this dilapidated, creaky building, right? And I couldn't help but notice this was the point where Nick was calling out to Judy, shouting out for her name, and she didn't hear it at all. Or at least that seems to be the way it was edited. And while there could have been a logical through line that at this point Judy was choosing to ignore him, we never hear his voice echoing through the house in order for her to hear it and then ignore it. And it's especially weird because this is an incredibly logically creaky house with literal holes all over the floors and walls, and yet you can't hear someone shouting inside that building? It's not a giant building. From there, I then also started to notice more and more that the building wasn't even really creaking either. And then from that point onwards, I couldn't help but notice that every other biome they went to just didn't have the ambience that I expected to be there. Now, maybe it's a bit rich of me to expect the sounds of birds and birdsong when they're around, trees and the like, since presumably they themselves are citizens with their own territory. But it also just generally felt like there were a few cases where there was no real diegetic sound in a lot of these shots, and it was just the voice performance and some soundtrack. It felt like the sound design was muted, and I don't see that as a symbolic thing, like, they're far away from where they were at the start or anything. Like, it just felt a little bit underdone there. And that's like halfway through the movie, if not earlier. And then the only other real complaint I have, at least in the early game, is the arc that surrounds Chief Bogo. As the plot starts to ramp up, Judy and Nick start to go on the run, and they're chasing after this third snake character. And very early on, Chief Bogo is poisoned with venom that leaves him for dead. At first, I thought it was a paralysis thing. No, it's actual death. He then spends the whole movie in a coma. And there is not enough screen time for that, I'm gonna say. I feel like there could have been a lot more of a physical arc or mention in there more with the press covering the state of the chief of police as this movie progressed, especially because it logically comes with all sorts of political commentary, as this movie has its hints, with it being another snake-related attack. It's a thing that doesn't really develop or add weight onto this story, it's just a background thing, and then, spoilers, it just gets thrown away at the end of the movie. It's a little underwhelming, and something that I think could have had more impact and weight on the general narrative, as much as, of course, the characters couldn't visit Chief Bogo because they are literally on the run. It's one of those small things. Of course, they've got such a large ensemble cast now with a whole set of new characters and all the old ones from before that they can't necessarily give him too much screen time, but even just a little more coverage in the news could have done something. It didn't, and it's fine. Beyond here, we're gonna have to start going into spoiler territory for all the final praises and complaints I have with this movie. Hey there! Thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come subscribe if you haven't already for more new movie reviews. We've got SpongeBob later this year, might do FNAF 2, and unless I get around to that Netflix In Your Dreams that I missed, that might be it for the year. We'll see. We'll keep up with what we can next year too. Otherwise, let's get back to the second half of Disney's Zootropolis sequel. Although chances are you've at least had access to the movie longer than I have, So let's get into how things really roll out. So of course, they catch up to the snake, they start to partner with the snake, and are trying to unravel this big conspiracy where it turns out it was not a lynx who invented the weather walls that are the entire basis of this city, it was in fact invented by a snake itself. And via some villainous means 2 or 3 generations ago, the lynx as territorial animals have decided to wipe out the lizard land by imbuing it in snow and expanding their tundra territory, which they are doing again. This, I think, is a fantastic conflict for a societal commentary and adaptation for the city of Zootropolis. Especially as we see the main lynx has all sorts of influence on the top end, also inferring that they got every single mayor elected. Love that stuff. And it's a really interesting parallel to run around with. Slightly vague, as a lot of the commentary was in the first movie as well, to be generally universal and just faintly paralleling certain different aspects of humanity, but the idea of throwing people out of their homes and overtaking their land is a really interesting one, and I love that a lot. It's also nice in seeing some of the flashbacks with the snake that I feel like there's a little bit of that influence with Zootropolis Plus, where we saw the shrew mob boss's backstory with the polar bears, which this grandmother of a snake also witnessed, seeing polar bears struggling in the heat and snakes struggling in the cold. I think it comes together really, really nicely, and the elements of this mystery unraveling seem fairly straightforward and nice. The idea that a patent is missing in a certain district of a hidden land is really, really nice, and it's not too plot twisty along the way to a crazy degree. I do think it's interesting as well, though, that the land that the lynxes ended up overtaking also wasn't actually inhabited. It was just like a claim for land. It's not like they built another town on top of Lizard Town, but that's fine. It's nice. Similarly, kind of having a bit of a refugee story of all these lizards that have been displaced and are now hiding somewhere else. It's a very nice parallel. Problems in paradise. Whilst at the same time, it was nice to see how some of the reactions to some of the old characters to these new problems both fit into the narrative and give a little bit more of their character as well, with the mob boss shrew just saying, oh, if you're bothering with the lynxes, you should just run. This is how the world works, it ain't gonna cut it. Here's the secret identity. I really liked that, because in a lot of ways, you could argue that would be a plot hole otherwise, of, oh, they knew a mob boss in the first movie, why not just ask him? They own the world anyway. No, there's a bigger boss in the underworld. It's nice, I like that a lot. Similarly, on the main character front line, the conflict between them feels like it comes together very, very naturally. The idea that the rabbit is always gunning to overachieve, always making every case for the biggest save the city kind of arc. Meanwhile, the fox is so much more cautious and actually cares about the life of someone else and wants to make sure they are safe and protected at a time when they're throwing themselves into danger. And the differences in that opinion of full dive and have some caution makes them clash in the middle and dysfunctional as a partnership pair for a time. That just rolls together so nicely, and they really brilliantly put it all together in a singular scene that is easily the scene that changed Zootropolis 2, with a layer of symbolism and conflict and tension. If you've seen the movie, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's the one where they're both scaffolding upside a mountain, and that single carrot recording piece, a motif from the first movie, also dragged to the second. Great, I like that. Becomes a symbolic reference to the core of their relationship, and then conflicting on these ideals up a mountain ultimately causes that thing to break in the first place. Ironic that neither of them end up falling off the mountain, as is usually the Chekhov's gun of that kind of scene, but I think it brilliantly wraps them together and has so much weight behind it too. Meanwhile, they do a chunk of this movie as separate people, which is kind of nice as well. They're not just sewn to the hip to each other, you know? And then, of course, as events unfold and we start getting more towards the end game, there's also this little other insinuation of parallels with humans, with characters saying some mammals are better than others. Pretty blanket and standard, but you know, people have that opinion. But also, we then come to our villain. Not the mainline Lynx cat, but our plot twist of a villain, because Disney movies always do a plot twist villain. But also, this villain is finally evil for evil's sake. Mostly. I think it's been a recurring trope recently that Disney movies have to have a villain that you kind of are supposed to root for to some degree, and you could argue because he's bullied by his own family, this guy's kind of the same, but they don't lean on it much, and instead he goes in the complete other direction of, I don't want to be different, I want to be just like my evil family. I want to be accepted. I will do bad things for the sake of being bad. I want to be bad because my family are bad. And I think that's nice. It's classic, it's standard, but I enjoyed it. It did seem a bit random that they then chucked in the Shining maze in the middle of this tundra, but hey, let them have fun, I guess. I had fun with it. At least it's a timeless reference for an iconic classic movie and not just a trend of the day that's gonna be irrelevant in 2 years. So that's something, I guess. But then, as we really come to the climax of our film, I, up to this point, have absolutely adored so much of the elements of this movie, and I think it really successfully puts together how to do a good Disney sequel, but this very, very climax has a couple of elements I didn't fully get behind. Now, the best bit, of course, is the earliest point of this climax, if you call it, the emotional scene that every movie has to have, whereby you have Judy on the floor poisoned by venom that I thought was paralyzing. It turns out it's death, just kills people slowly. That's great. All the while, the snake is freezing out in the cold, both betrayed last minute by a new Lynx boy. Poppet. Doesn't work in my accent. Poppet. Whatever. And the emotional swing of that scene is that this snake has heat vision and can be healed himself by simply the heat of Judy Hopps on the floor. It's nice. It's fine. It's not as emotionally heavy as some of the very best of cinema. I'm not going to expect 100 out of 100 out of this movie. 90 out of 100 is more than fine. 95, 94, somewhere around there. It's fine. Beyond this point as well, though, you have Nick being confronted by our new villain, who ends up saving Judy by throwing an EpiPen down a hallway. Don't worry about that. The main thing that a bit of is a crux is the whole cliff that the villain and Nick are on starts to fall. And as Judy is immediately revived by this anti-venom, she then goes on a sprinting run to save Nick while he's falling off the cliff. And we just hit nano time, is the best way I can put it. There's a little bit of slow-mo in there, sure, just for the dramatics of the cliff falling. But I think this movie, either narratively or in the editing, just goes a bit too far out of the realm of realistic that it threw me out of it in how these follow-up Deus Ex Machinas keep going. You're telling me that while Nick is falling, Judy is revived and goes on a run around a whole buildingscape up to the cliff to catch him? Oh, and also the snake did that. The snake, at no point that we saw him, was perfectly able to keep up with Super Speedy Bunny out the building, around this whole labyrinth of hallways, up the stairs, over and over to the cliff to catch the rabbit who goes and catches the fox. It's a bit much. It's fine. It's like, just suspend your belief, but it's a bit much. I don't know why every character in this suddenly became Quicksilver, and it kind of continues that way, because the story doesn't end there, and that's nice. I did think it was a hint early there, as then all of these characters are going to be running and gunning towards the secret lizard town that they've discovered, where the MacGuffin thing that solves the case is going to be around. They then have a couple of blockades along the way. You've got the rest of the Lynx family blocking the path for two of our hero characters, the snake and the beaver. By the way, there's a beaver. And they then get into a fight with the older lynxes. Also, the horse mare's there. Funny, whatever, let it do its thing. Then you finally have Judy and Nick running for the final attack on the lynx. They catch him, by the way, on the way to the village, which I thought was a little underwhelming. I kind of would have rathered the climax at the village, but you know, sure, on the way, in the middle of nowhere, in the snow, cool. Anyway, they go for a fight, things don't work out too well, and the snake and the beaver that were just fighting the elder lynx cat, 3 versus 2, and a horse in the room, have now teleported over to the other two now, in the middle of nowhere, to fix up the final lynx boy. And the horse, who has admittedly room to have an arc of, oh, he's being controlled by these people, he wants to be a mayor, he's whatever, he wants to be the hero that he sees in his TV show. He's randomly flipped sides and is fighting the lynx cats with no fear or problems, but it just kind of almost happens off screen. I wish we would have seen at least a semblance of the horse watching the fight, and more so inferring that maybe they need to come to the right decision, or they want to be the hero they see themselves as, because they just looked scared in the corner. We cut to later, and now he's bravely fighting all of them, and the characters have teleported away. It's again a little bit of nano time, where it feels like at some point the writers had to pause and bring all the characters somewhere else to hit those Deus Ex Machina saves. It feels like this is a fantastic 9, 10 out of 10 story that right at the very end They just couldn't stitch their wins correctly. It's the smallest thing. Suspend your belief. Oh, these characters, they helped save the day. They won the fight, but also the fight never finished, and now they're over there winning another fight. It's fine. Even when we get to the Lizard Village, which is more played like a slow, quiet, emotional piece, lovely and nice. I love also all sorts of details, like all the snakes are called Sally and Barry, and this one's called Gary. And you see their little lengths drawn horizontally on a wall. Love that kind of environmental storytelling stuff. Even there, the Lynx boy shows up. He was tied up in the middle of nowhere and they left him. Okay. He shows up and immediately burns the house down. He then gets stopped last second by a couple of police officers. We cut back to where the fire was, and the fire just... it disappears. You know, there's a little bit of like this, don't worry about it. It's fine now. You know? There could have even been more emotional weight about that, of... They finally get to the house they wanted. They find the piece of paper that they're trying to make sure doesn't get destroyed. And in the process, everything else gets destroyed. You know, actually, this history is slightly lost. And then you do the cliche Encanto thing. The whole town comes over and fixes up this new lizard town, spruces it up, you know? Instead, it just becomes a very kind of quick montage without enough of a weight to it. It's fine. It's nitpicking. I understand. But especially for all these climactic fight scenes, it just sort of teleports and magically comes together, Disney magic-wise, and the finale was in the middle of a white snowfield. It is honestly fine otherwise. Wish they gave more to Chief Bogo and his coma arc as well. But I like that the villain stuck to the evil thing and didn't do the wishy-washy thing. And a lot of the expansions make a lot of sense with territorial land and mammals being better than other mammals, even if this place was just abandoned anyway. I guess that's kind of the point, or can be. And a lot of the conflicts throughout this movie just felt natural, as much as well, it was a fairly standard mystery thriller rollout. But brilliant all the way along. There's a big thing about Burning Mammal Festival. I don't get it because I've never been to Burning Man Festival because I ain't American. But hey, this is the Zootropolis version of the movie, not Zootopia. So what can you do? And crazy, all of these events happen like just what, a week or a month after the first film? It's pretty soon afterward. There's talk about how in the flashback, really there was a whole framing of snakes in the first place. Oddly enough, it was framing a snake to kill a tortoise maid. I don't know if there's something to be said about how that was a reptile on reptile crime, considering I actually thought it would have been surely that lynx themselves got bit by a snake. You know, that seems like a more bigger thing. And technically, you could have then reflected that with the lynx boy martyring himself. That's where I thought the plot was going. Like, he was going to poison himself and blame it on the snake. But also, that's its own other classic tropey ending. So, glad it went the way it went. It's interesting. Beyond that, you then have the final resolution between your main characters. It's very millennial coded. It's more of that self-aware, over-analyzing therapy talk of, I've got unresolved childhood trauma and I expose my insecurities by the fact that I do this, that, and the other. And like, yeah, it's fine. But also, I think it worked really naturally for this particular set of characters who would have the self-awareness to acknowledge those kind of tropes and traits. And similarly, the idea of therapy has been a running theme in this movie, with them having to go to partner therapy at the very start of this thing. It, surprisingly, is a trope I usually dislike, but in this version of the script, in this adaptation, they managed to make it work seamlessly with the world they've created, the themes they're talking about, and the characters they have designed and written. Overall, this is a massive surprise of a success from a Disney sequel, and really shows that it comes down to how well your writers and creators can put your prompts together. Because there are a lot of quotas visible in this movie, but I don't really have any major complaints about anything, because they've masterfully slithered around and captured all of those check marks in a way that is satisfying and well done, and actual, somewhat cinema being created by the company who's meant to be serving us cinema. So, I really can't praise it much more than that. This was a pretty damn good Disney sequel. And there I was thinking it couldn't be done. Although the bub joke definitely flopped. From there will likely be a third Zootropolis. I assume, based on a post-credit scene, they're gonna play around with birds next time. We haven't properly seen them in this city. That, or it's just a reference to a turkey feather because it's also Thanksgiving. Or it was, when it came out in the US. But otherwise, that's about all the thoughts I've got to say about Zootropolis 2. Genuinely a real surprise from what I thought was going to be pretty neutral and average and good, but not great. Turns out, it is pretty great. How lovely I can finally say something positive about a recent movie. Maybe cinema's not completely dead, at least in this little pocket of a universe. For now though, I'd best finally end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell us your thoughts about Zootropolis 2. I'd love to hear all of your reviews and any details you saw along the way. Let us know in the comments down below, and I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!